All right, we're going to kick things off. Welcome, everyone. And we are back again for the March Patch Tuesday. So the theme of today's webinar will be everybody gets a 0 day. Windows has some 0 days, and Mac has some 0 days, and Android and iOS have some 0 days, and even Linux has some 0 days. We're going to talk about a lot of 0 days today. So yeah, what looked at first glance as a very mild Patch Tuesday is actually apparently going to have a lot of excitement for us all. A little housekeeping before we get started. You've got myself and Todd here, as always, hosting the webinar. And backstage, we have our crew of helpers that are continuing to support us. Anything you've got questions on, go ahead and fire those off in the Q&A section, and we will, one of us will be getting to your questions there as best we can throughout the webinar. And there are a few docs and other things that you see there too. So in the Goldcast platform, you'll have the docs section there. You can go in there and grab today's presentation. There are some additional content and things that you can download from there as well. Things like getting access to our Security Insights podcast, if you're not familiar with that yet. Some recent reports and things that we've done around different industry topics or product-related topics. So some good stuff there. We have a couple of, looks like our 60-second tech recordings on some of the new Ivanti Neurons patch reporting features. So those of you who are either evaluating our Ivanti Neurons for patch management solution or already using it, you'll get a couple of quick tech bites, I believe we call them. On patch reporting and our custom dashboard feature there. So some good stuff in there. But for today's the presentation we're going to go through, if you want access to the links and things that we're going to be talking about, grab the presentation now. That way you don't have to wait until later when the follow-up email comes on. You've got access to grab it right away. All right. So next, we are going to go through and talk about the lineup of updates that came out. We're going to talk about some news. Todd's going to walk us through the bulletins and releases from Microsoft and third parties that we're going to be talking about specifically. And then we're going to talk about the Between the Patch Tuesdays. So for those of you who are regulars, you know this, but those of you who might be catching us for the first time or rejoining us after a while, we talk about a lot of the updates that happen in between Patch Tuesdays. Microsoft is one of few vendors that has kind of a predictable cadence. Most other vendors are on more of a continuous delivery cycle. And especially products like the browsers are onto almost a weekly cycle in most cases. Mozilla has 2 to 3 releases each month, and Google Chrome releases weekly with security updates now since August last year. So there's quite a bit to go over. So let's dig in. In our lineup from yesterday, we had several Adobe releases. So we're going to be covering several of those here today. None of those are higher priority, but to be aware of those. And Acrobat Reader was one of those. So that's probably the most widely dispersed throughout your environments is going to be the Reader update. Most of the rest of them is going to be your creative team at most. So you'll probably have very few additionals beyond that. But the Adobe Reader update's the one you'll want to take a look at and make sure it's part of your regular update. Google did have another Chrome release. They had the Chrome release from last week. And if you look at Microsoft's release notes for this month, you'll see that they resolved 10 Chrome vulnerabilities. That was last week's update. Monday, they actually released another one that Edge had not released yet. That's the one that includes the 0 day that we're going to talk about today. Good news is the 0 day is actually on the Mac side, not the Windows side. So Google Chrome has a Mac-related 0 day that actually is one of 3 on the Apple OSs this month, but that one does not affect the Windows side, to my knowledge, from everything that I've read up on. Microsoft side, got 4 bulletins that we're going to be talking about. Out of those, there's 57 total CVEs were resolved. 6 of those are known to be exploited. So that's a bit more of the excitement going on this month of where we've got all the 0 days. Good news is all 6 of those are in the OS this month. So if you get your Windows OS update, if you get your OS updates for all your platforms updated, all the risk we're talking about this month is all in those OS updates. So your platform updates are the high priority this month. All right. So digging into a bit of the news. Now, this is where I'm going to jump back and forth between slides and screen sharing. So I'm going to walk through a few of the articles and kind of highlight a few areas that you'll want to maybe take a look at. Again, for your regulars, you know that this is more of just informational. This might be additional reading that you may need for your environment, specific to information you might need to have discussions internally. For those of you who are new to the webinar, we often try to give you more than just the specific updates that released here. It may be updates from a few days ago or a week or two ago. The Apple ones in particular were released between like end of January and the Chrome related one coming out just Monday this week. So there's different things like that. A lot of this is for awareness, but those links will have more details, including some follow-up links that will help you get to the information that you may need to dig in deeper. So first article, this one is talking about the Apple WebKit 0-day vulnerability. And this is the one that I came across it as I was looking into more detail about the Google Chrome exploit that was resolved. The references that I saw in Google's post talked about a vulnerability in WebKit on Mac that was reported by the Apple security team. And with that, I did some additional digging and found there were even more 0 days out there. So not only do we have the first one here, the 2025-24201, this is a vulnerability in WebKit, which is a web browser engine component. But that affects several different Mac distributions. But also in that same article, they started talking about two other exploited vulnerabilities that were out there. So I've provided links to both of those, but this first article also has links to those. So between all of that, you could see iOS, iPad OS, Mac OS, Safari, Vision OS. We've pretty much got, these are affecting everything. If you look into the other vulnerabilities, we start to bring in TV OS and Watch OS. So as I mentioned before, it pretty much is all of the platforms are affected. The 3 0 days do bring into account pretty much all of the Apple platforms. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you're getting those Mac OS updates in place for one, but your phone users and Apple device users especially, and if you are running Apple TVs throughout your environment, those are a few things to include there. Let's see. The first article here about that WebKit vulnerability, they give a little bit of detail that the attack was targeting specific individuals. So the attacker in this case was executing a campaign against a select set of very specific targets. But there was a high level of sophistication involved in that. So you're most likely talking, some nation state level or very sophisticated level threat actor is the one who's exploiting these. With more news going out around these, though, the risk of these becoming more mainstream is definitely a concern. So again, probably minimal impact to begin with, but it gives you a little bit more time to make sure you're getting all those platforms updated so that you stay ahead of any attackers trying to get their hands on it. The next one, and this one actually I found after I'd already submitted my content over to get posted to the platform, because we have to do it so far in advance of the webinar. But I was looking through our Linux content for this month. We'll talk about that in a moment. As I was looking into that, I saw a reference to a known exploited vulnerability there. And as I dug into that vulnerability more, getting an understanding of what it was involved in, that's where I came across the Google 2 actively exploited vulnerabilities that came out this month. So in the Android security update, they just announced that they've got 2 known exploited vulnerabilities as well. There's a privilege, both are privilege escalations, but the 2 of those are resolved in this latest Android round of updates that are coming out. So your Android devices as well, also make sure that those get updated as quickly as possible. Then we jump over to the Microsoft side. So Microsoft had 6 0 days this month. And so I've provided the link to the Krebs on security article this month. He's got kind of a variety of different details about several of the different flaws, a little bit of feedback from some industry experts on several of those. But in this case, the vulnerabilities that we're talking about, the majority of these are already added to CSIS KEV list and are definitely all being flagged as things you'll want to make sure to stay on top of this month. So one thing, as I was looking into the 6 Microsoft 0 days this month, I'm going to jump back over to the slides real quick. Now, keep in mind, this is a hypothetical. As I was reading up on 4 of the 6 vulnerabilities, it started to look like there was a chaining scenario going on here. And as I looked at the references to all of these, 2 of the vulnerabilities, the 2 that are not included in this example here, were attributed to very specific threat researchers. These 4 were all anonymously submitted. So the credit was not acknowledged to a specific individual. As I was looking at these, it very likely is possible that they could have all 4 been used in the same attack. Again, disclaimer, this is a hypothetical situation, but I thought it was a really good example of one of the common questions that I get, which is, hey, why are the CVSS scores and vendor severity ratings for vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited so low? If you look at any of these 4 vulnerabilities individually, the first one here, it's a vulnerability in FastFat. It's a remote code execution. It requires a USB device and the mounting of a virtual hard disk to be able to exploit. So a lot of moving parts, a need to convince a user to grab a USB device and plug it into their device, or have physical access to the device in question. So there's a lot of limiting circumstances there, right? So yeah, the severity on this vulnerability by itself is only important, even though it's a remote code execution. The CVSS score 7.8, not uncommon for that. We see a lot of known exploited vulnerabilities with a 7.2 to 7.8 CVSS score and an important severity rating. The next vulnerability, information disclosure, 4.6 CVSS score, rated important. The next one is another information disclosure, 5.5 with an important rating. Kind of odd for such a low CVSS score to get an important rating. Usually we're down into the moderate rating or medium rating for Microsoft severity rating if that's the case. And then we've got another important 7.8. If you start to look at the pieces below here, the first part of this attack, it's a USB drop. So those of you familiar with a USB drop, if I'm targeting a specific company that I want to do that, I can go and drop a device in the parking lot. I can maybe leave it in the bathroom of their lobby. There's a lot of different tactics that have been well proven to get results. That USB device, somebody is curious, they go plug it in thinking, oh, hey, this might be some coworker, they might have left some stuff around. It might even have sensitive data on it that we might need to worry about. So they go and plug it into their device. All right, FastFat exploit, remote code execution vulnerability is executed. We launch a virtual hard disk. Now we need more information. The first of these 2 information disclosures requires a USB device to be plugged into a system to do that. And if you do that, it can grab some information off of heap memory, which could be sensitive in nature. It could be anything from account information, password information, other information that we might need to further progress the attack. The next vulnerability, again, we have another virtual hard disk mounting required to be able to trigger that. So that USB drop leads to information disclosure. Now I've been able to go in and read heap memory to find all the information I need to do the attack that really matters. This 4th one, which is needing to mount that virtual hard disk, which we've already done because we did it for 2 of the previous steps. And we can execute our final remote code execution now that we've gathered all the information we need. And now we can do whatever it is we were trying to do, which was probably in this case, getting persistence onto that device. And from there, being able to start digging in deeper, moving laterally, and working our way towards either a data exfiltration, a ransomware attack, a combo, like a hybrid of those two, or whatever else we were trying to do in that case. So this is the type of threat that we deal with regularly nowadays. It's never one CVE that we need to worry about. It's a combination of multiple CVEs working together. And this is why looking at CVE specific metrics blinds us to the greater risk. Where risk-based perspectives come into place is they take into account those real-world factors. We've got 2 information disclosures, probably really benign here in just looking at the vulnerability by itself, but when used in conjunction with something else, becomes extremely dangerous. So the combination of these 4 together brings us up to a very critical state, and probably, hypothetically could be a very effective combination in a real world attack scenario. So that's the kind of threat that we're looking at, and why having the right risk-based metrics in your environment is important. All right, so that was just a little bit of a hypothetical to look at this and understand more about how attack chaining comes together and why we need to look at more metrics. So the vulnerabilities, we already talked about a few of these, but we'll go through and talk about the full set here. Again, the links are there, so if you want to go to any of the Microsoft articles, you can get access to those and drill into more detail. One of the other 6 that we haven't talked about yet is the Win32 kernel subsystem elevation of privilege vulnerability. CVSS score of 7.0, rated important. Elevation of privilege vulnerability. If the attacker executes this, they could gain full system privileges on the device. We talked about the NTFS info disclosure vulnerability already. Again, this is the one that required plugging in a USB device. That, with the other FastFat vulnerability this month, becomes a deadly combination in a USB drop attack scenario. The FastFat vulnerability we just talked about, NTFS information disclosure. So this is the one that required us to mount a virtual hard disk, but with that, we're able to get additional information off of there. So the 2 information disclosures combined are probably being used to get the right breadth of information and be able to then further the attack scenario. And then we've got our NTFS remote code execution vulnerability, 7.8 CVSS score, rated important. Again, required a virtual hard disk to be mounted to be able to execute that. But it's, again, if you've got that another vulnerability that allows you to execute something on there, that could be the step before this that allowed you to mount that virtual disk and then exploit the whatever remote code you were trying to do. The last one is a security feature bypass in Microsoft Management Console. And this one rated important 7.0 CVSS score, but all 6 of those in this case are actively being exploited. So bottom line here this month, your OS update is the most important update on the Windows side or the Microsoft side this month. You push that out and you've resolved all 6 of those 0 days that we just talked about. So that's our most urgent item this month, is, again, back to our platform updates, our OS updates across the board.
Hey, Chris.
Yep, go ahead.
We have some old timers on this call who said that clearly some of these vulnerabilities, Stuxnet revisited.
That's a very good reference. So hardware attack scenarios are absolutely a exercise in social engineering. And Stuxnet was a prime example of how effective that can be. That actually went across an air-gapped network with a USB device to be able to deliver malware in to damage centrifuges. So that's a really good real-world attack scenario that definitely made a lot of press over the years. But that's the type of risk of this type of threat. If you've got devices like that, if you don't have USB controls in place within your environment or some type of forcing of USB devices to be encrypted to be able to be used on corporate devices, that can leave you exposed to a very tried and tested social engineering scenario. Yep.
Exactly.
All right. Now, not that this one is as devastating as any of the other ones. There was one public disclosure this month from Microsoft as well. This one is a remote code execution vulnerability in Microsoft Access. And in this case, the vulnerability disclosure did not have, the code maturity was unverified, which typically means the disclosure was a researcher or somebody talking about it. It did not provide code samples, but it may have provided enough information to know roughly the ballpark of where I'd look to target this, looking for this vulnerability, or maybe a little bit on how to potentially attack it. In this case, because there's no code samples out there, because the attack pane or the preview pane is not an attack vector, it's mitigating things a little bit more. So if you read my blog from yesterday, my guidance on this one is not enough additional risk to really bump this up to critical status and make it a urgent item, but just make sure your Office updates are getting done in your monthly maintenance this month, and you'll be good against this one. Public disclosures increase the risk that threat actors will be able to find enough information to piece things together and attack a vulnerability. This is one of the reasons why private disclosures and coordinated disclosure are so important. It lets a researcher and the vendors that are affected collaborate on, find the flaws, and get them resolved before threat actors can get enough information to go after it. Public disclosures usually mean that a researcher released information about it without the vendor either having time to respond to it, or if they felt the vendor wasn't taking it seriously. Some researchers will release information without the vendor actually applying an update yet. The other way that this often happens, and this one is a good thing, but also challenging at the same time, is we are in the time of year when we've got a lot of white hat researcher activities going on, things like Pwn to Own and other conferences where threat actor or researchers have a chance to show their skills, potentially get some money for, showing sophisticated attacks, taking advantage of certain flaws. Those all basically get counted as public disclosures because they're aired on, either live in person or in other ways. They may not be sharing code samples, but information about what they're targeting or combinations they're using together oftentimes bubble up. So those types of things can lead to public disclosures as well. But basically, it exposes enough information that threat actors can try to get a jump on us and actively exploit a vulnerability. All right. On the Ivanti side, we had 2 updates this month, each responding to just a single CVE. No known exploits or anything in these, but the Ivanti Secure Access Client had a 7.8 CVSS score vulnerability resolved there. And the Ivanti Neurons for MDM had, this one didn't have a CVE ID. It's just got a code weakness ID on it. That's why you don't see the CVE number there. But in a lot of cases, when you're resolving a vulnerability on a cloud product where there may not be any end work for a user to do, those times, the cases oftentimes don't have a CVE associated. But if you're on either of these products, more details are available. Go to our security advisories page on our blog, and you can take a look at this month's security advisory update, which has links to each of these product pages and any information you're going to need for mitigations, downloading updates. All that information is there. Also, if you're not already, you can subscribe to those security bulletins that are coming out so that you get notifications as soon as they go live. That was live earlier in the morning yesterday for everybody to get that information as quickly as possible. Okay, Linux side. I talked about that Android vulnerability. This is the one, the 2024 50302. Digging in deeper on this one is what led me to find that article about Android. So this one, it was a flaw found to be leveraged in a tool offered by digital intelligence contractor Celebrate. they were using it to unlock the phone of a activist in a case that they were working. But that has since gotten its hands into other groups, so it's been detected being used by the Serbian authorities as well at this point. And you can expect that a tool like that will continue to expand. My understanding from the Google article is that there was a chaining of vulnerabilities used in some of those cases, but even so, the ability to unlock a mobile device like that is potentially risky, because somebody loses a device that gets into the hands of somebody who can then unlock it and potentially get access to proprietary information, sensitive information, so on. So definitely one you want to make sure to get resolved, both on your Linux devices and your Android devices. The next two are vulnerabilities that affect all Linux distributions. There are flaws in OpenSSH. So check into these here and make sure that there are some mitigation options for one of them. The changing a configuration to no in your SSHD config, so that can mitigate 2025 26465. The other one is changing some settings around login grace time and max startups, which can they're basically saying it's not definitive. It's not going to protect you against this, but it could make it harder to exploit. But getting your OpenSSH version to version 9.5 SP2 or above will resolve these two. So that's the guidance there. And servicing stack updates, Windows 10. I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of servicing stack updates leading up to the end of life of Windows 10. So keep an eye on those and make sure you're getting your servicing stack updates applied there. For those of you who plan to go beyond the end of life with ESU support, definitely make sure your servicing stack updates, as we get closer to October, are in place, because they will most likely be required to make sure the ESU support will work. And for those of you who are end-of-life support dates, obviously Windows 10, October is when we're coming up on it, and the first of the Windows 11 editions, 22H2, will also be end-of-lifing in October. For those of you who are going to be looking into extended support, Microsoft has a lot of documentation available now. They are expanding the support models. So for those of you who did 2012, you know that was a little bit of a bear. They had the ARC agent was required for most of you. They relinquished that a little bit towards the end and started trying to do more flexible ways for especially larger customers to push back hard. But the good news is for Windows 10, they're offering multiple scenarios for making sure that you can get ESU coverage for your devices. So there's multiple licensing models, there's pricing available, a lot of information like that. For those of you who are looking into supporting that and needing to continue supporting that through patching through Ivanti products, we have a knowledge base article that's now live that talks through the details here and more information about that. So if you need additional support there, you can reach out to your account rep and get that process started as well. Microsoft obviously charges for extended support for maintaining that. They're going to give you a per device price model. We have an operational cost that we have to account for in continuing support for 3 more years for this. So Microsoft and other vendors don't stop releasing new stuff when they go to extended support on this. So it requires us to expand our infrastructure to keep supporting new things while continuing to maintain older. And this, we have to do an operational charge for this service as well to offset that kind of cost. So we have a tiered model. It is more of a environment-wide subscription fee, depending on the number of Windows 10 devices you are planning to continue support for. We're trying to give variable price breaks for people who have smaller numbers. With Windows 10, we expect there's going to be a lot more people, and the numbers are going to vary greatly. Todd, I think the latest information, we're still seeing that Windows 10 accounts for 40 to 60% of active Windows OS or desktop and laptop devices out there yet, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Chris. Yeah, different polls are showing different numbers as high as 60%, believe it or not. You're right.
Yep. So we know that a lot of you still have Win 10. We know that many of you are not going to be able to go get everything removed before the end of life date. And some of you are probably going to be limited by some hardware in place, and you're going to have to continue ESU support for a while. So we want to make sure to continue to support you on that as well. So if you need help there, we're ready for you to get that in place as well. So you can reach out to us and we can deal with any details, getting everything in place so you're ready to go come October. All right. On that note, I think, Todd, we're ready for you to walk us through the bulletins.
Okay, sounds good, Chris. Thanks for the intro. Chris mentioned the Chrome update that came out with the 0-day vulnerability. There were some questions actually in the chat around this as well. It's CVE 2025-24201. I have highlighted there in red. Did come out, like Chris said, on Monday with that particular Chrome release, so be aware of that one. Make sure you get this into your round of updates here shortly. Adobe Acrobat and Reader, number of vulnerabilities, 9 that were addressed in this particular update. Adobe did rate it at their highest rating of 3 because 6 of those are critical and 3 of those are rated as important, so make sure you get this one out. Incidentally, if you're looking at our content, that will be going out today. We had some issues with this particular patch yesterday, and it will be released today in our content, so be aware of that one in case you're looking for it. The other ones did come out yesterday as planned. We had a security update for Adobe Illustrator. Again, Chris mentioned the Creative Cloud side of things. 6 vulnerabilities addressed in this one. Adobe did rate this one with their critical rating as well. There were 3 critical vulnerabilities as well as 3 important ones addressed in this particular application. And finally, Adobe InDesign as well had 9 vulnerabilities, 7 rated critical and 2 important. So again, keep your Creative Suite up to date on both Windows and Mac to address those particular vulnerabilities. None of these were reported as exploited in the wild, so they are not 0 days per se. But you want to make sure, obviously, to cover yourself and make sure that the vulnerabilities are fixed in the latest versions you're running. Moving on to the Microsoft side, we saw the Windows 11 update come out yesterday as well, of course. Last month they had 37 vulnerabilities. This month 36, so kind of staying at the same kind of level there roughly. In Windows 11 there were 5 of those 0 days that Chris described earlier that were known exploited that were addressed in this particular update. None of the CVEs in there were publicly disclosed. There were some issues that were fixed. You might remember the Open SSH issue that we've had for the last couple of months. That one has been resolved finally, so it's dropped off the books. Hopefully it has been fixed in your environment with this latest round of updates as well, and everything's running well there. They still do have this Citrix issue that they introduced 2 months ago. It's a session recording agent issue. So I've called it here the Citrix _SRA. You'll see that it applies to a couple of different versions of the Windows 11 operating system, and you'll see it in Windows 10 as well. This one's been around now for a little bit. Hopefully they'll get this one resolved soon. It is a known issue in these particular versions that I have listed here of Windows 11, the 22H2 version, the 24H2, and the Server 2025 version. Windows 10, same number of vulnerabilities addressed. There are some slight differences in the actual vulnerability numbers in case you're wondering. This particular first CVE here was not present in Windows 11, but it is present in Windows 10. That's the 24983 vulnerability. So all 6 of the 0 days Chris talked about are fixed in Windows 10. This one was not present in Windows 11, as I said. Couple of known issues around Windows 10. Again, that same Citrix issue that I talked about earlier. There's also this information, this Windows Event Viewer issue. There's been some chat about it in different forums. This one was introduced last month. It hasn't been resolved yet. And so there was some commentary in like patch management, for example, the patch management forum talking about this. So still not resolved. Hopefully they get to this one here soon. Just be aware of that one as you're installing the latest updates for Windows 10. On the Office side, both Office updates, the on-premise version as well as the click-to-run versions, were rated critical as well this month. Large number of vulnerabilities fixed this month. There were 10 for Microsoft Office. You can see they impact Access, Excel, the general Office suite, of course, the Office Mac side, as well as Word 2016. So again, a wide-ranging number of vulnerabilities there. CVE 26630 was the one that's publicly disclosed, and Chris had talked about that one earlier. Again, none of the 0 days per se in this particular update. Under the click to run version, again, rated critical, one additional vulnerability addressed here. This covers the 4 versions, whether it be Office 365, 2019, and the 2 long-term service channel versions, 2021 and 2024. So again, no known issues reported on these updates. If you see anything, let us know. When I first saw the list come out from my team about what they had released this month, it didn't look like a lot, but then I realized that the security updates without CVEs, there were a large number of updates that were released this month. So be aware that, as Chris said, Patch Tuesday may be the big one for Microsoft, but a lot of these vendors release continuously throughout the month, and you want to make sure that you keep up with all these updates. We do break them into security updates with CVEs when the vendors provide the CVE information. I have those here on the next couple of slides. I'll show you that. If we don't they don't publish CVEs, but they say there are security fixes in these, we list them in this middle group here. So that's generally the largest group, like I said, in the overall list of patches that we release. And finally, we do have non-security updates if the vendor doesn't say anything in particular, maybe a performance update or a bug fix or something like that, but they don't say anything specific to security. We lump them into this last category.
Yeah, and I think one thing, Todd, to note on that is keep in mind most of these vendors, they're a continuous update stream. So where you are point in time, that specific release may resolve vulnerabilities in that particular step. But if the next machine is N-3, you could be resolving CVEs from multiple of those 3 versions that it's behind. So a lot of vendors will have a security branch and a non-security branch. Those security updates without CVEs are typically that security branch. Even if that update did not have CVEs documented, the version before or after it might. So that's why we keep it in a continuous stream on the security side, where some vendors like Java, they'll specifically have I can't remember if it's the odd or even, but basically one version is the security related, one version is the non-security related. So the ones that never have security related items in it is the ones that go into that non-security bucket. So little nuance there, but definitely helps people understand why we keep things without a CVE tied directly to that release in more of a security track.
Thanks, Chris. The ones that did have CVEs released this month, Adobe InCopy was released. Google Chrome, a couple versions of that. As Chris mentioned, these are generally weekly updates that come out usually on a Tuesday. We did see the one this week, though. It came out on Monday a little bit early. Firefox, of course, gets some regular updates. It also has some non-security releases as well. In this case, Firefox 136, large number of vulnerabilities were addressed, 16 listed here. Don't forget the long-term service version they call extended support versions, ESRs, also are getting regular security updates as well. So if you're having to run one of these older versions of Firefox, make sure you're continuing to update them as well. LibreOffice had a number of updates this month. Thunderbird, the email program also from Mozilla, gets regular updates as well. We saw an update from VMware Workstation addressing 3 vulnerabilities as shown there. And finally, for those of you who are in the debug mode and running Wireshark, both versions of Wireshark got some updates this month as well, addressing one CVE each, I should say. Onto the Apple side, we did see some security updates with CVEs released as well between Patch Tuesdays. I have those listed here. Large number of non-security updates as well. Of course, Google Chrome running on Mac, as you would expect. Regular updates there. Again, the weekly updates that come out for the Windows side, also on the Apple side. We did see an Emacs update. So those of you who are using that particular editor addressed 2 vulnerabilities. Of course, the usual Firefox, which is also running on Apple Mac OS, and Firefox, of course. And of course, those of you that run Edge, we have the regular updates for Microsoft Edge running on the Apple platform as well. and finally Thunderbird. So again, lots of updates between the Patch Tuesdays. Make sure you keep up with those, have them worked into your patch deployment program there. With that, Chris, I think we're back to the Q&A session. How will we do it?
So we had quite a few questions that were kind of specific in nature to edge cases or specific scenarios. We're not going to cover all of those live here, but I think a couple of interesting things to note. John shared a comment that Citrix apparently pulled some of their latest LTSR releases yesterday as well. So for those of you running Citrix products, they did have a couple of things that they pulled. So check out the Citrix side for more details there. We had another question around, are there any other good to know, March updates like we had last month in February? There was the certificate-based authentication changes for Windows domain controllers. I was digging into a variety of things and I didn't see any that stood out for this month. Doesn't mean there weren't any, but Todd and I have a limited amount of time to try to pull information together, and we can't read everything out there. So sometimes it's hard to find those things if Microsoft buries them a little bit. Yeah, I know Chris, that. Go ahead, Todd.
I was going to say, Chris, I had put two links in your intro in the news slide there that might be of interest. One of them has to do with the deprecation of Skype and moving to Teams. Yep. Obviously, that's an end-of-life issue. And also with the driver synchronization with WSUS. Both of those are ending in April. So be aware of that. They did send out a 60-day notice. Obviously, we're almost down to a 30-day notice now. So be aware of both of those. The links are included in the news section there, Chris.
Good call out, Todd. Thank you. I didn't go into enough depth on those, and I apologize for that. I was jumping around between sharing at the time, but I just jumped back up to the in the news slide. So what Todd's mentioning is those two articles from April Patch Tuesday, the Skype to Teams, and the actually you have April Patch Tuesday. It's supposed to be March, right?
No, those are there's one more update. They're going to end of life on April Patch Tuesday.
Oh, okay. So that's end of lifing next month. So
correct.
I get it. I got it now. Yep. Thank you. My mind was in multiple places and wasn't catching up there. And then a couple for October. So we talked a lot about the ESU, but those of you running Exchange Server 2016 and 2019, I can't remember. I mentioned it a month or two ago, but good call out there to refresh everybody's memory again. If you're running Exchange Server, we talked about the fact that they're making another push to get people to either Exchange Online or to move to Office 365. So keep in mind that there's a couple of things coming in October and then a couple of things coming in April that we just talked about there. But yes, good call out there. Let's see. I was going to mention...
There were a couple of things I answered early on, Chris, around checkpoint updates. So I'll reiterate it for the group here. Microsoft is going through some growing pains with their checkpoint update process for Windows 11 24H2. They've run into some issues with language packs being installed, where basically the customer had to reinstall a previous checkpoint update and then install the language pack. There were some issues there. So you might see that in the news. I will say also there were some questions on what Ivanti is doing about checkpoint updates. We are actually going through an engine and content update process here, whereby we will be recognizing the previous checkpoint updates. And if they are missing for any reason when you're jumping from like a GA version up to the latest version, and there are checkpoint updates in between, we will handle those automatically in the future. We're not doing that right now. If you're doing a regular update from month to month, there are no issues that we've had reported. But if you need to jump, from the GA version in the future, you will have to go through. We want to avoid having to do like a double reboot where we install the checkpoint update and then the latest cumulative update. So we'll be handling that here shortly. We're working on that with our engineering and content teams right now, and that'll be pretty transparent. That'll be under the covers once we get that back and installed in our product set.
Yeah, and the majority of your users will never experience anything like that. It's really only if you've skipped a couple of months and you hit one of those thresholds. So that's provisioning of a new system that needs to get caught up, and a user who might have been out for a prolonged period, like a maternity or paternity leave, something like that, could hit those account scenarios. But for the most part, you won't have a lot of occurrences of that. But that could happen. That's why we're doing some technical work to account for that and make sure we can handle those scenarios more seamlessly with a single reboot. Brad shared one more piece that we didn't catch as well, but there's a reminder that we are at 6 months away from Microsoft deprecating SMTP auth. So that's coming in September as well. So thank you, Brad, for sharing that one. A couple of those other news articles, again, news links are in there. Grab the presentation, but I shared a couple of links with people who were specifically asking about that. One other question that came up from a couple of people, just to articulate it again, but the ESU coverage. So if you want to do ESU support from Microsoft, you have to pay Microsoft per device for licensing that ESU support. From what Todd and I have gathered in our research, the pricing starts at $61 per Windows 10 system in year one. That's MSRP. They may give you price breaks and other things, but that's the starting point. And will double each year. So 61, 122, and so on. Ivanti, if you want to do the ESU support through us, you have to get it from Microsoft first, because that licenses you to be able to do that. For us, it's just a feed that you subscribe to that has an operational cost for us. It's not a per device cost, but a product wide charge for that. We give tiered pricing for that to make it flexible for people who have smaller numbers. But this is more just for us to continue supporting that for the next 3 years. We use that to help support our operational costs for infrastructure and testing and other things like that. Licensing, because we have to license systems too to be able to support that. So all of those costs are wrapped into that fee to Ivanti on that one. So that's the reason for needing both, is if you just get the Ivanti feed and you haven't licensed from Microsoft, you will find patches that are there, able to be detected, downloaded, and will not install because the endpoint is not properly licensed by Microsoft. So you do need both. So just wanted to make sure that was clear on why that is. All right. There was a question around elaborating more on the SMTP auth. I don't have enough details about that one. I'll see if I can find an article about it real quick, but I think otherwise that wraps up all of the major questions that we had. Todd, any others that you're seeing?
No, the other question I answered in there was around the priority of patches that we release. Obviously, 0 days are the most important to get out as quickly as possible, followed by security patches, followed by non-security patches. So generally, we rack and stack those in that order to get out the door. We do not do multiple updates on a patch Tuesday. If there are 0 days and security patches separately, we kind of lump them all together because we don't want to confuse our customers with multiple drops during a patch Tuesday. So we'll combine everything together and get it out the door just as quickly as possible. The only exception to that sometimes that we get dinged on is if there are some like .NET non-security updates, for example, we might push those off to the second day. And some of our customers have occasionally gotten a little frustrated because they want to be able to roll everything out at the same time. But just be aware that, we're prioritizing things in that order to get them out to you from the security perspective. We want to make sure that we have that in place. But generally during the month, we will prioritize on any given day the 0 days first, along with security patches, and then follow that up with non-securities. So that's kind of the way we approach these things. I also get a question sometime on Patch Tuesdays, like how do you determine what goes out the door and when? In addition to the priorities that I talked about there, even though Microsoft will announce patches a lot of times in their security bulletins, we often don't see, like, for example, Office 365 patches come online until like the very end of the day. So in a lot of cases, sometimes those will get pushed over to day 2, like today, and they will go out the door. The content for those will go out the door today from Ivanti. So just providing some perspective on how we rack and stack things and how we release them as quickly as possible.
So thank you to Mark and John. They were both quick on the draw. They found the links to the SMTP article about the same time I did there. But the SMTP authentication deprecation was specific to Exchange Online. So I shared the link with one person. But if you're looking for it, deprecation of basic authentication in Exchange Online was the initial article. There's a couple articles out there now, but it's for those that are running Exchange Online. They're deprecating basic authentication. So again, they're just trying to improve and harden security around Exchange. So they're pushing people more and more towards the Exchange Online, more secure authentication models, of course, and ideally they'd like to push more and more people to the Office 365 model, but there's a lot of debates back and forth. Honestly, from everything I've read up on, Exchange is a complex beast with a lot of sophistication under the hood, and very few people truly know how to harden an Exchange environment to make it solid against threat actors. We've seen some pretty nasty Exchange attacks over the last couple of years. So Microsoft, instead of trying to re-architect the entire thing, they have Office 365, which the Outlook Online version is resolving a lot of those security challenges that were in the Exchange platform. So whichever side of that debate you're on, whether Microsoft just wants more money or they are trying to do some better things, but trying to go and gut and replace all of Exchange is not a viable option. Either way, this is just information for those still running Exchange. They're pushing to harden it more and get things into environments where it's better managed. So cool. All right. I think that wraps up. Yeah. Mark just commented back that the Hafnium hack was a real wake-up call. It was definitely one of the nastier nation-state level attacks that we've seen in a long time. Okay. Oh, there was a question about how the platform works. Ed had a question of why other people don't see questions popping up there. So the Goldcast platform has ways to submit questions, and there is a way for us to share those questions, but if we do that, it actually shares the question, including the person who submitted it. So if you didn't click anonymous, it would then have your name up there as well to protect the anonymity of our users and not share their name with everybody. We speak through those responses that are more generally kind of everybody should see them. So that's why you don't see it for everybody. The alternative is we can actually disable that so everybody's anonymous, but then if Todd and I don't get to all your questions during the course of the session, we have no way to know who asked us a question to be able to follow up afterwards. And we've had to do that over the years from time to time. So that's why we don't share those out with everybody, and we just try to speak to them, is trying to keep that anonymity while making it so that we can reach you if we needed to do a follow-up. So excellent. Thanks, everyone. Love seeing you all here, as always. Actually, one bit of recent news, the Patch Tuesday event series here, we won another award for Utah Business Magazine has some marketing and events type awards. We won another event award for this campaign. And that's in part thanks to all of you, because you guys keep coming back and joining us month after month. So Todd and I obviously talk about some interesting things. So thank you all for joining us once again, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thanks, everybody.